result of that disobedience was never good. So I should not also be disobedient. Okay? That's the intellect. Then we have issues. And that's why, like I mentioned that another ayah amongst many, وَيَجْعَلُ رِجْسَ عَلَى الَّذِينَ لَا يَعْقِلُونَ, that Allah will always place His punishment upon people who don't think, who don't have that intellect or use that intellect properly. People like that, in other words, will always find themselves into trouble. Sure. Right. Right. We all have different levels, and that's another point. Not everyone has the same level of intellect. But there is, if you will, that's the beautiful word that you used, is what? Common sense. There's a certain amount of intellect that every human being is expected to exercise. Expected to. I know that, we're laughing now because that's very rare nowadays. And I might get to that point. It was something I was thinking about just coming here, just the fact that in the information age, even in Western academia, there is a big complaint now that people don't use logic. We have all this information, but people don't really think. That's why we have slogans, but we don't really think things through. Right? Someone just says something, it sounds neat, terrorist, fake news, right? Whatever it is. I know a lot of ladies are going to get on my case about this. It's very politically correct, but believe all women. Well, that sounds great, but honestly speaking, is that really logical? Can you believe every woman? You can't believe anyone, man or woman. If there's a problem, then there's due process. If someone makes a complaint, what do? Due process. Let's find the facts out, not just, okay, whatever someone claims, it's true automatically. But that's the problem with the information age is what? We just get information and we don't analyze it. We don't think. So nowadays, common sense is actually truly, it's not there, unfortunately. People just kind of follow whatever's going on. We've become like, very, what's the word I want to use? What's that? Well, followers is one thing, but just, there's a word. See, that's when my brain is going in different directions. Now I can't think either. Knee-jerk reaction. We don't never really analyze or think about things. We just kind of react to it emotionally. And if you want to read a good book about that, read Amusing Ourselves to Death by Neil Postman. Yes, he does explain very well how, in essence, television and the modern means of, now it's gotten worse because of the internet, but the modern means of information that we have is pretty much to blame for that. Because just the nature of television is such that you're not analytical. The information just comes to you and you just react to it. Right? And he gives many examples of this. There's empirical evidence that proves this too. It's not just literally, even people have done studies where they've shown that the brain, when it watches television, it shuts off the analytical part that it uses to think about things and process information. Except some people. And those are the people that you can't watch a movie with anyhow. You know why? My son's like that. Everything is criticized. Oh, that's ridiculous. This is ridiculous. That can't be. This will never happen. That's the only... You can't watch TV with a person like that, right? Because they're every second, that's a problem, this is a problem, that's a lie, that would never happen, right? But the nature of the television, and even now I dare say the nature of tweets and all this stuff, is that you don't have to analyze anything. It's just hashtag, and I'm following. That's the follower part. Like, okay, that sounds nice to me. Let's follow the trend. We want to revive the intellect and understand how it works. So I did go off a tangent there. Anyhow, khair. So you get the point. What is the aql then? The aql is roughly translated as intellect, but I wanted you to see the connection with its original word in Arabic that is actually connected to a verb that means to tie down a camel. Aqala yaqinu, iqilha wa tawakkal. Right? Tie your camel, then trust in Allah. Because the mind should keep you, or the intellect should keep you from doing things that are silly. It should give you a certain sensibility of what are the results of your actions, and therefore prevent you from doing things which would bring bad results, bottom line. Now, if we go further down the road and we go into the mutaakhirun, the latter day scholars of aqidah, of creed and ilm al-kalam, theology, they had rendered a very important definition of aql. And I'll recite the Arabic and then I'll translate. نور روحاني تدرك به النفس العلوم الضرورية والنظرية. So the first part of the definition, they say that it is nurun ruhaniyun, which is very interesting. They said that it is a spiritual light. They define the intellect as what? A spiritual light. Now follow me for a second. This is very important because I had this discussion with another, if you will, person who accepted Islam. People use all kinds of funny words. Convert, revert, new Muslim. I don't like any of that. I like what the Arabs say, it'anaqa, meaning they embraced Islam. You take shahada. Right? Revert and all these things, convert, they have their own implications as words themselves. So, you embrace Islam. So there's another brother I met back in Upper Darby around Philadelphia who is also a person who embraced Islam from a non-Muslim background originally. He happened to be Jamaican. So he came to me after one salah and he was complaining that, all these brothers always talk about spirituality in Islam, like nurturing your spirituality. But I became Muslim because it was more intellectual than it was spiritual. And I said, look what you just said. What is the intellect? Is it a physical body? Can you define it for me physically? What are its dimensions? Anyone here? What are the dimensions of the intellect? Right, that's part of it. We'll get to that. But I'm just saying the thing itself. We're talking about something that exists that we term. That's another question too. But even then, wherever it is, can you, right now, has anyone ever been able to give the intellect dimensions? What's its weight? How much does intellect weigh? What's its size? What are its measurements? Do you get my point? Are you getting where I'm getting at it? Is the intellect something that we can physically define? No, that's even then. That's not IQ is an assessment of how much they believe someone has of intellect. But the intellect itself as a thing, let's put it as something that exists, is it something that has dimensions that you know of that you can define? Give me its weight, its size, its measurement, something. Is it? So if it doesn't have dimensions, then what is it? Is it physical or metaphysical? It's metaphysical. It's not a physical thing. Okay? You see the point? So this is what I told him. I said, look, that's the problem. We don't think. Again, we're not analytical. The intellect is, and I have a problem with the IQ thing too, because that's another, how do you now, how do you quantify intellect? Okay? Really, just because they can solve certain problems, now you can quantify their intellect? It's very questionable, right? Not everyone agrees with even IQ tests for that reason. I mean, how do you quantify intellect? The point is here that the intellect as a thing, as something that exists and is there, and we all acknowledge, it is not physical. And that's the first part of the definition. Nurun ruhaniyun. It is a spiritual reality. And the reason why I'm saying that too, how many times have you talked again in the Muslim world where people say, well, it's a matter of the heart, not the mind? Well, what exactly do you mean by that? Do you understand? As if there's a separation between the two, which we will get to, which is not actually. But the point being also is that what? The heart would be spiritual and the mind is not. Assuming that the intellect is in the mind, and that's where, if you were to make it a physical thing, that it's there somewhere, like a little guy up in your head somewhere, right? Right? Typing things or doing whatever it's doing. If you were to assume that, okay, then why are you saying there's a difference, as if the intellect is not a spiritual thing? And it is. It is nurun ruhaniyun. So that's the first important point to understand, that it is a metaphysical reality of man, of human beings. Let's be politically correct. Sorry for saying men. Of insan, human beings, okay, men and women. It is a spiritual aspect of our beings, not physical. But what is its purpose? Tudraku bihi and nafsu. This is the interesting part. The soul, the nafs, through it, indicating bihi that it is a tool. Remember we said this before? It is a tool. It is something that God gives us for a purpose, like any other tool. We've been given hands and limbs for certain purposes. Correct? So the intellect as a tool is given by God to the soul. And that's another interesting point too, because the body has tools, like we just mentioned, hands, feet, arms, leg, all that great stuff, right? So the soul tool has the certain tools and certain, just like this, why Imam al-Ghazali rahimahullah said, just like the physical part of man has parts, the soul too has parts. You have nafs, qalb, aql, ruh. Okay, so the soul also has different aspects. Part of the aspects of the soul is it has aql, it has intellect. So what then is that intellect's purpose? Tudriku, idrak, it can perceive al-ulum. It gives it knowledge. What kind of knowledge? Of things that are intuitive, self-evident, and things that are, if you will, what word should I use for nadariya? The difference is certain things are intuitive, self-evident, you don't have to think about them, but you know them. And other things, in order to know them, you have to actually think about it. Either way, the intellect is a tool that you are given by Allah to your soul to be able to perceive things and understand things and thereby derive through it knowledge of things. Okay? Like what you alluded to earlier. It is the tool God gives us, in other words, amongst the many, to derive at knowledge. لا تعلمون شيئا فجعل لكم السمع والأبصار والأفئدة. So the intellect is part of the tools that God has equipped you with in order for you to do what? To arrive at knowledge, to acquire knowledge. And even here, the knowledge that we're talking about is beyond just what you perceive physically, because God has said He's given you the ears and eyes, ears to hear, eyes to see, to do that. Is this making sense? Right? You already have these other tools to perceive things physically. So then what would be the heart's purpose and the intellect's purpose? Yeah, but also to perceive things that are beyond what? The intuitive, or that's physical. Remember I alluded to that last time, that when you're trying to use science, there's a physical, biology, all these subjects are purely speaking empirical. They're physical in nature. You have to study the physical world, and that's its extent. Why can you use that? لا تدركه الأبصار. Physical sight will never reach or comprehend Allah. You understand? This is the statement again of Allah Azza wa Jal. So if you're using your physical faculties to try and understand these realities, you can't. So what do we have left? Yeah.
So what about the things that we do see in this creation?
Yes.
That also help us understand?
It does. But it helps us in this. This is the point. You use those things, what you know. This is called nazar, being analytical. What you do know, you now establish knowledge of things that you don't know. So through the physical creation and by studying it and observing it, you should be able to not just understand how it works, the mechanics of it, but you should be able to derive things that you don't know. Not the how, but the why. This is where Western knowledge stops. They're only at the how, the mechanics of it. The why, the deeper questions that you should be asking, and we will use that later on as we go on with these classes to prove the existence of God itself. As Allah says Himself, إِنَّ فِي خَلْقِ السَّمَاوَاتِ وَالْأَرْضِ وَاخْتِلَافِ اللَّيْلِ وَالنَّهَارِ آيَاتٍ. All of these things, the physical creation and universe that we live in, no doubt are sure signs of God's existence. But it depends on how you're looking at it. If you're looking at it analytically to derive things of what you know to what you don't know, then yes, you may arrive to the knowledge of God and His attributes. But if you don't, if you're only looking at it in one way, how it works, the mechanics of it, then even then, a biologist or a scientist will admit that this is not our realm. We could care less about all of these fancy philosophical things. That's why even according to their definitions outside of our tradition, when I will get into what is rationally plausible, they say rational plausibility. Plausibility means what? But by pure ration, by definition, it is possible, even though physically it's not observable. As an example, by definition, you cannot have a square circle at the same time. By definition, it's impossible. By what? Definition. However, I can say an elephant that flies is not observable, but logically what? Plausible. Because by definition, it doesn't contradict either ideas. An elephant, that the tasawwur and the concept we have an elephant, or flying, there's no contradiction there. In fact, the things that may prevent an elephant from flying now You can do what? You can remove all of those contingencies, and it is very well plausible that an elephant can fly. So there's a difference between purely physical sciences and what they observe and what the mind can conclude. That's a very important point. You have to, because I made this point last time too, because many people make objections against certain things and ideas that are there in every religion and in Islam as well, with the idea that that's not rational. But they don't know what they're talking about, because when they say that's not rational, what they mean to say is that was not physically possible or observable. We've never seen it before. We've never seen a man who lived to be 500 years. Does that make it rationally implausible? No. Why do you think Disney froze himself, and even Stalin? Because even they understood this principle, because death is just you can prevent death if Allah so willed. There's indications of that in hadith too. What did the Prophet ﷺ say? That black seed, al-habatul sawda, black seed is a cure for everything except for death. It's almost to say that if it was possible, it could be possible to cure even. The only reason why you must die is because this is Allah's decision, not because it's not possible to escape death if you really wanted to. If it was impossible, then why would it be in the hereafter? We'll never die. So again, coming back to the original point, is death something that is possibly rationally plausible to say we can escape? So why is it rationally implausible to conceive of a man who lived for 500 years? Is it? No. Just because you only live for 60, 80, or 90 years doesn't mean it's rationally implausible. Does everyone get what I'm trying to say? There's a difference between what you have seen and observed and what is rationally plausible. That's a very important point. So to say that it's irrational that a man lived for 500 years is not irrational. You may have never observed it. It doesn't matter. I've never observed an amoeba becoming a fish and then becoming a monkey and then becoming a human being either. And you never will observe it. Right? Just simply, to break everything down to one simple thing that if I haven't seen it, it doesn't exist, is just asinine. You know? Exactly. There's a lot of exactly. And they gave this story once. I read a book of philosophy where a British guy goes to the king of Siam. That was the old colonial day, Thailand. And then he says to the king there that it gets so cold in England that rivers freeze and they no longer move and there's snow. And because he's in Thailand, he has never seen these things. So what does he do? He immediately tells him he's talking nonsense. How is it that a river would freeze and not flow? Well, what is his objection based on? Nothing other than simply put, he has never seen it happen before. Okay, so that's an example of how you can't just base your objections on something that is so simple that I've just never seen it happen, so that can't be possible. That's not the rational mind doesn't work like that. The rational mind can perceive of things that may not exactly be there right now in our world that we exist in now, like you said, like a cell phone. If we were living even not too long ago, when I was growing up, we didn't have cell phones. The first cell phone was a big, ugly thing that you could only have in your car, right? And it was limited, too, at how much connection you could have. I couldn't imagine either at that time that we would have these phones where I could talk to someone on a video cam all the way across the world. And it happened in our lifetime. So you cannot base your conclusions based on only observation. And this is what the point we're getting to. When we talk about intellect here, we're talking about the ability of human beings to come to conclusions that are beyond just what they observe. Okay, that point being made, everyone understands? Any other questions? I'm trying to go through it quickly because it's already 12:20 and I didn't even begin. Khair. So we're going to have to skip the chase. Unfortunately, I have to use that example. Astaghfirullah. So al-hukm al-aqli then, when we use it with the rational conclusions that we make, I'm going to just briefly go over this so we can stop there, and if there's any questions, we can start. There are three kinds. This is an important point of today's lessons. This is actually what I wanted to cover. The rational mind can conclude things, and when it concludes things, it only has three conclusions. Something that is wajib, something that is mustahil, or something that is jaiz. These words we're using too, we're not using it in a fiqh perspective. Wajib, from a fiqh perspective, means it has to be done. Right? It's an obligation. Wajib, when it comes to the aql, meaning the rational sciences, means two things I will One definition, according to Alamat al-Sunusi rahimahullah ta'ala, is مَا لَا يُتَصَوَّرُ فِي الْعَقْلِ آدَمُهُ. What the mind can never perceive of its non-existence. Meaning its non-existence is not at all rationally plausible. To give an example, as they do in some of these books, a physical body that does not occupy some type of space in a dimension, in other words. Listen, again, you have to use your brain. A physical body that does not have some type of dimension. If I say physical body and then I tell you it has no dimensions, that's why, is that plausible? Right. So something the mind cannot conceive of its non-existence. So if it's physical, right, then it must by default have, by definition, have some place in dimension, right? Some type of form that can be defined by dimensions. And even furthermore, not just that, but any type of measurement. As they say in Arabic, أَخْذُهُ قَطَرًا مِنَ الْفَرَاغ. That's the definition in Arabic. Like a certain amount of space that it occupies that can be measured. Can you conceive of its non-existence? Physical body without dimension? What's the answer? No. So then it's wajib, meaning the mind only will conclude one thing. When you use the word physical body, you are immediately implying physical dimension as well. It's impossible for the opposite to be conceived. Does it make sense? Okay, moving on. Al-mustahil is the opposite of that. مَا لَا يُتَصَوَّرُ فِي الْعَقْلِ وُجُودُهُ. Whatever the mind cannot conceive of its existence. Square, circle. What's the problem with the definition there? Is that something that the mind can conceive of its existence? A square, circle at the same time. We're not talking about a circle with a square or a square with a circle. Right? Understand? Or a cylinder that's a square at the same time. Any shape, any dimension. Does that work? Right. The mind cannot conceive of its existence. Now what is jaiz? It means something that both its non-existence and its existence are equally conceivable. They're both equivalent. As an example that they give, not so much based on the physical things that we observe, but more on a spiritual basis, which I kind of want to allude to here today also, is that they gave an example from a spiritual point of view that can Allah Ta'ala punish an obedient person and forgive a disobedient person. Right. Both are conceivable. One is not, you understand? Both are very much so, what? Conceivable in the mind. That it is very possible for Allah. Why? Because Allah has qudra. What's the definition of qudra? Inna Allah ala kulli shayin qadir. Which is also mentioned in Hadith Qudsi. Man alima anni dhu qudratin ala maghfirati dhunub. Whoever knows that I have the full power to forgive sins. غَفَرْتُ لَهُ وَلَا أُبَالِي. I will forgive that person and it makes no difference to me. So what is the idea? Allah has full power. Full power denotes that He's not obliged to do anything. If I want to forget that, even Nimrud was smart enough to figure that one out, right? When Ibrahim alayhi salam came to him and said, there's Allah who has power, he said, well, أَنَا أُحْيِي